Remember the superhero game genre? Superhero games manage to completely bypass the common flaws that sandbox games have by focusing entirely on really fun mechanics. Because honestly, it's just a simple concept. What if you just throw a guy with superpowers in a city, right? That's essentially it. And yet these games have pretty much disappeared. I don't know if maybe they wore out what little room for innovation and improvement that they had. I really don't know. But Infamous Second Son was one of the last ones, and talk about going out with a whimper. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about one of the greatest superhero games of all time, Prototype. Created by the developers of Hulk Ultimate Destruction, which if you've played that game, you can definitely see the similarities. Prototype is essentially a game where you play as a villain protagonist. I wanted to say anti-hero, but let's be real, you eat people. You're not a good guy. You're not fighting for the cause of good either, even if Alex himself believes it in the beginning of the game. No, this is a game where you mutilate and devour and shred and tear to pieces and smash into bloody chunks people, and to some extent monsters, but a lot of people. And this is probably the closest thing that we'll ever get to a proper Venom video game, because the powers here are pretty similar to Venom's moveset. You're basically a living symbiote in this game. And so of course the question is, how good was it really? Well, let's find out. But before we get into it, do what the algorithm likes. You know, liking and commenting and blah blah blah, right? Check out my Patreon if you want to support me directly. And let's fucking eat some people. Now, of course, the most important part of Prototype is obviously the powers. Any superhero game, that's basically the entire appeal, is what can you do? Well, the folks at the late Radical Entertainment were pretty creative with Alex Mercer's abilities. Because, yeah, you're essentially a living symbiote, as I said before, so he can form his limbs into whatever weapons he needs for the situation. And he's basically made of incredibly dense flesh, probably from eating so many people. So you're also highly resistant to bullets, can run super fast, jump extremely high, glide somehow. You kind of just outstretch your arms and glide. And dash through the air in a similar anime-like fashion. And the weapons you can create are massive claws, giant hammer fists, a super long whip tendril, buff arms, which is kind of hilarious, and of course the most important and iconic one, a giant fucking sword. And basically you gotta use these various tools and some tertiary abilities to try and stop the virus, and along the way you're gonna have to fight the US military in various forms, whether it be ground troops, tanks, APCs, helicopters. You even have to fight near the end of the game these hulked out super soldiers, which they're really goofy looking, honestly. And of course there's also mutants created by the Blacklight virus as well, where you've got typical zombies, these big hulking hunters that are surprisingly fast, these giant tendril things that can like suck up and throw cars, and of course some boss fights against the sources of the virus or monsters that can control other monsters. And yeah, I mean, I could describe this vaguely for, you know, another 5 minutes, as I've done in a couple other videos. But really, the only thing that's important here is, what is the fun factor? Well, obviously, moving super fast and jumping high and running straight up buildings has its own fun to it. But of course, how good is the combat? It's pretty good. It's not amazing. It's fairly simplistic. You have light and heavy attacks for each power. but you have to unlock most of the abilities. Like, the upgrade window in your pause screen is pretty much how you get all of the abilities. There's a few that you get through the story, but for the most part, you just buy them with points from doing various challenges throughout the map, or completing story missions, or just eating people, right, to get your health back. And so even once you've unlocked most of the abilities, it's fairly simple. Certain abilities are good against certain types of enemies, like the claws are good against the mutants or humans, and hammer fists are good against vehicles. Giant sword is good against everything. So giant sword kinda makes almost all of the other abilities obsolete. Whip fist is probably the only one that's still useful because you can use it to hijack helicopters. Which, yeah, that's another thing you can do. You can hijack vehicles. Once you've eaten a operator of a vehicle through a story mission, you gain the ability to hijack that vehicle. And one of your major abilities in this game is that you can disguise as the last thing you've eaten, right? So if you disguise as military personnel, you can just walk through enemies as long as there isn't a viral detector nearby. And so you can use that to just directly climb into a tank and start blowing shit up. Which ties into the stealth aspect of the game, which is pretty bad, to be honest. This is probably the worst part of the game, just walking slowly and waiting until enemies aren't looking at whoever you need to consume and become, and then just doing the stealth consume. The worst part about it is the stealth consume can't fail. It will only activate if nobody's looking at your target. So you're basically just spamming R1 circle over and over again until you can eventually eat a dude, right? And you gotta use this to sneak into military bases, or occasionally do it for a story mission to get into some area. But honestly, the stealth sections are short enough that it's not really a big deal, so I don't count it too much against the game. Now really, this is just about causing chaos as much as possible. Talking about it doesn't exactly do it justice. I mean, obviously there's something inherently fun about like elbow dropping a tank from like 500 feet in the air or some shit. That's just really awesome, you know? It looks cool, it's fun. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be complex, and it's definitely not complex. The most fun you're going to be having in this game is based around how you want to approach a situation. Because you could just go in and just like start sword slicing everything, or you could disguise yourself and hijack a helicopter and rain hell from above, or you could build up critical mass, which is basically your most powerful abilities. You can surpass your health bar by a certain amount and then consume that extra health to do a devastating attack that basically just kills everything on screen. The problem with that is that the ability's a bit too good. On any mission that you're supposed to just destroy everything, you're just going to be spamming those abilities over and over again. Now that's not to say this game is easy. It's actually not as easy as you would think. Now, I did play this on hard mode, which you have to beat the game to unlock it, because I've already beaten this game a couple times. I really like this game. On hard mode, obviously, it's a bit harder, but just in general, there are certain elements that are designed to be difficult until you really get a grasp on how certain mechanics work. Because one of the biggest parts of the game is like escaping pursuits, right? Because once you piss off the military, they call in a strike team. And that's usually 2 or 3 helicopters that like to spam 50 cals or missile barrages on you. So you've basically got to run away. You can take them on if you're powerful enough, especially if you just whip fist hijack a helicopter, which is usually the way I did it. But if you don't have those abilities, you got to lose your pursuers. And the thing is, I guess much like real life, it's very hard to lose a helicopter if you're running in a straight line, no matter how fast you are. So what you really do is you just run one block, you air dash twice around a building, and then instantly just become whatever your disguise is, and you've lost them. And this is the problem with the disguise system, on top of it just being brain dead easy, is that the only way to give yourself up is by doing extremely obvious things. For some reason, the US military is so dumb in this game that if you drop from a 300-foot building and land next to somebody, they're not even slightly suspicious of you. They like take a look at you and they're like, hey, go check that out. And then nothing comes of it. You can be in a helicopter's vision, like, again, like 500 feet in the air, gliding through the sky, and they don't think that's suspicious at all because you're wearing a military disguise? I get that these elements exist to make the game less annoying, because if you were constantly pursued for just playing the game, that probably wouldn't be fun. But at the same time, it just makes the whole stealth section of the game feel really brainless and a waste of time. But back to the good bits. So essentially how this game's gameplay is divided. It's like most other sandbox games. You got a big city, you got your story missions, you have these challenges, which are really the main side gameplay, where essentially you either have to run from point A to point B as fast as possible, which is pretty boring. You gotta glide into a circle, which is extremely easy. I mean, maybe just because I've played a lot of platformers, it's easy for me. But either way, I pretty much won those first try almost every time. And then you have the really fun ones, which are essentially, one, they restrict the weapon or the ability that you can use to kill a certain amount of enemies in a time limit. And you'd think, well, that's really simple. But at the same time, it just displays how fun the basic gameplay is. Like, the claws are a normally kind of useless ability, even just a third of the way through the game. But when you do a challenge where you gotta kill as many enemies with the claws as possible, it really shows just the fun elements. When you're forced to not be as efficient as possible, you can just enjoy the game doing something cool and fun. And the other type of this mission is ones where you actually ally with either the infected or the military to kill the other team. And I really enjoyed those because, one, the team you're on can't friendly fire you and also doesn't attack you, so that's a refreshing change of pace from the normal missions where usually it feels like they both team up against you. Hunters specifically target you whenever you're in their view radius, which can be very annoying if the military is also trying to kill you. So for once, you can just kind of focus on the enemies and just absolutely destroy them. And some of those restricted weapon missions also will have you use enemy weapons, because you can pick up any rifle, any grenade launcher or rocket launcher in the game from a soldier and use that. And so they'll have missions where it's like, okay, you have infinite grenade launcher ammo, just go shoot some shit for a while. But that's the thing though, in a way it's just pretty good. Because while the mechanics of the game are really fun, even if maybe they're a bit bloated, there are probably a lot of abilities you're not really going to use, but they're there if you want to have fun. Like, you can body surf on people, which that's cool as fuck. And you can also, like, kick people, like, super far across the screen. It serves no purpose at all, but it looks awesome. So you have a lot of these extra abilities, especially another thing too is defensive abilities. You have your shield, which basically will auto block attacks until it breaks. It can't really absorb that much damage, but it is a good like little freebie against the little baby pellet machine guns everybody has, of course. And then the other armor ability, which is the awesome one, is just armor. It's like this badass like anime looking hard like chitin type of shell around yourself. It's very cool, obviously. It just reduces all damage by I think half or something like that. There's also vision abilities, which you're never going to use outside of like one story mission makes you use one. So yeah, whatever. But yeah, to get into kind of, this is just the middle of the road aspect of the game, is the actual mission design. And this is what I would argue definitely makes it inferior to like the Infamous games, for example. And I don't know if this was just a budgetary problem, but it extends to both the story and even just the actual design of the missions gameplay wise. The story is pretty much, I mean, it doesn't matter at all. You're Alex Mercer, you're an offshoot of the Blacklight virus, essentially, and, you know, being a human dude, you're just like, hey, maybe I should use my powers for good and try and stop this stuff. But he's also like a weird sociopathic creeper.
They know. And pretty succulent right now.
Find anything?
Jesus Christ, don't do that.
Sorry.
I mean, you see him around his sister and his ex-girlfriend, and he just acts like a weirdo. And they explain this in the story. I might as well spoil it, so skip to this if you've never played Prototype. It turns out you're not human anymore. You're the actual Blacklight virus itself that has taken the form of Alex Mercer, who was a scientist, even though he looks nothing like a scientist. He looks like a random emo 20-something. And so you're just emulating human emotions based on all of the humans that you've eaten, basically. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad there's a story explanation as to why he's such a psycho, but it also makes it very difficult to relate to him. But even taking out that element, there's just nothing about the story that's really that compelling. I mean, there's the whole, like, backstory of Hope, Idaho, and where, like, the virus originated, but they never fully explain it in the story itself, because you're meant to fill out this web of intrigue, which is a game mechanic that shouldn't exist, where basically you eat a bunch of people that are marked on the map, and it's supposed to explain, like, how that whole original government project happened and where the Blacklight virus came from. But they explain enough of it in the story where you really don't care about the details anyway. Not that they even matter. And even disregarding that and, like, the lack of any real villain, because, like, there are these minor villains. There's Elizabeth Green, who's like Patient Zero. There's the military general guy and his second-hand man. And that's about it. And as for good guys, you got your sister, a random scientist guy, an ex-girlfriend who betrays you. And yeah, that's about all the characters. And your sister and the scientist guy just drop out of the story 2/3 of the way in. You never talk to them again. They don't really even explain it, really, except your sister got, like, injured and scientist doctor guy has to look after her, and that's literally it. And then you just work with the second-hand man dude. And, like, the big twist, spoiler again, is that the second-hand man military guy is Elizabeth Green's son, and so he's, like, the supreme ultimate final boss dude that you gotta kill. Which, again, brings me to the mission design. So, why is it just okay? Well, because you don't really do anything unique. You're doing exactly you do for the rest of the game, just in a mission design fashion. Most of the missions are just fine. It's just like, go here, blow up this building, eat these people, disguise yourself, whatever, right? But then you have missions that force you to play the game a very specific way. Like, there are missions where you have to stay undercover working for the military the entire time. And so they're basically like escort missions where you'll have to escort this tank to blow up this building while driving a tank. And it's just extremely slow. It is so slow. There's another one where you have to, like, fly a helicopter the whole time and rescue people off of buildings. And you gotta kill, like, 10 of these tendril car throwing dudes. And it takes so long. It takes so goddamn long. And then we have the boss fights, which are all just... they range from very mediocre to garbage. Like, complete and utter garbage. I don't think I liked any of the boss fights, except maybe the final boss fight. But that was ruined even a little by hard mode, because hard mode does not balance these bosses at all. They pretty much all kill you in like 3 hits. And there's several phases in the fights where you can't heal, because you got to eat people to heal, and the game doesn't spawn anybody, so you just kind of have to start over, and there's nothing you can do about it. Imagine you're playing God of War, or Devil May Cry, or Bayonetta, except your dodge has no invincibility frames, all of the enemy's attacks have big areas of effect, and the only reliable way to dodge is to jump and air dash. And air dashing takes you halfway across the arena, so you don't have enough time to exploit the gap in between attacks. And usually the way that you beat the bosses is through some cheap gimmick, like spamming Whip Fist, or just throwing explosives, or using like a grenade launcher or something. Basically anything other than actually fighting the enemy with your cool powers. In fact, the fight against Elizabeth Green is so ridiculously bad. You can't get anywhere near her. She's basically this giant, like, huge tentacle mass head thing with, like, her body lodged in the middle of the huge tentacle. And the only way to reliably damage her is either, one, spamming the long-range Whip Fist attack, which takes forever, or just eating all the dudes around till you have enough health to spam Devastator attacks over and over and over again. And when you whittle down her, like, protection meter, you gotta smack at her face, and you gotta do that at least 3 times. Constantly, these hunters spawn in the arena and chase you down at lightning speed, so you don't even have time to eat the guys half the time. And she has these homing orbs that shoot at you from across the arena, and the military's there to annoy you too, and it's a mess. On hard mode, it took me literally 30 minutes to beat her. 30 minutes. So yeah, not fun. Not fun at all. And the final boss just has too much health, dude. And when he's down to a third of his health left, they give you a 3-minute timer to finish him off. And you think, oh wow, 3 minutes is a long time, right? Well, it took 10 minutes to whittle him down to a third health. Which, if you're doing the math, means 3 minutes is not enough time. It took me over an hour of trying over and over again to beat this guy. And it turns out the muscle mass power, which is one I've really never used, because all it does is make punches and kicks stronger and you do more throwing damage. Turns out the things you throw in this arena do more damage than anything else in the game, because you can throw helicopters and you can throw explosives and stuff, like missiles. And so, believe it or not, just throwing stuff at him is the fastest way to kill him. This is the one time where the blade does not do enough damage. So I think it's safe to say the boss fights are pretty bad overall. So I guess to wrap this up, how good is Prototype really? Well, it hasn't aged perfectly. Like I said, the mission design is overall just okay, with a lot of bad missions in there, some good ones. But really, you're here for the main gameplay mechanics, just like any other superhero game. Prototype is a game that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's hard to describe exactly why it's fun despite all of the problems. It really just comes down to being a guy with superpowers and beating the shit out of the military and these mutants and like blowing up buildings and hijacking vehicles, and it just makes for a very fun gameplay loop. The thing is, everything around the gameplay loop is just kind of mediocre. So really, you're playing it because the game is just fun to play, and sometimes that's all a game really needs to be. Is it the best superhero game? No, definitely not. I think Infamous 2 is significantly better than this game, but Prototype is still in the top 5 without a doubt. You should definitely try the game, but don't try it on PC. This game is very, very difficult to get working on modern hardware. I tried like 5 or 6 different fixes, and the game still didn't work. So, you know, if you have a PS3 or PS4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, whatever, play it on that. PC should be a last resort here, unless you've got, you know, a really old computer lying around. It's a very fun game. It needed a higher budget, and it's a shame that the sequel really didn't learn from this game at all. I'll probably tackle the sequel someday, but the sequel plays it way too safe, trims down a lot of the fat, even if the fat was good fat. And overall, it just kind of seems like a repeat of the first game with just a new protagonist, and Alex Mercer is the bad guy of the sequel. Who asked for that? Nobody. And of course, you probably know that after Prototype 2, Radical Entertainment got shut down by Activision, of course. So Prototype's been dead for probably almost 9 years now. And with Infamous Second Son being just kind of an okay game, that pretty much killed off the superhero genre. And any game with a superhero in it at this point doesn't even attempt to emulate this sandbox genre. Like, the Avengers game is a fucking, like, Destiny hack and slash type of game. The Arkham games are beat 'em ups. There's nothing really like Prototype or Infamous anymore. And I think it's about time that one of these franchises comes back. I know Sucker Punch is busy with Ghost of Tsushima. They're probably making a sequel right now. Which means it's time to revive Radical Entertainment or something like it. Come on, Activision. Really? What do you even make anymore other than Call of Duty? Get your shit together and make another Prototype.
What if I become something less than human, but also something more?
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Thank you to all my patrons. Every little bit counts. Remember to do the things the algorithm likes, if you haven't already. And not too much to talk about. I pretty much covered in the last few videos the type of things I'm working on. Outriders will be coming out after this. Possibly a small Binding of Isaac type of video after that. And then probably Resident Evil 5. Then I think I'll do Ratchet & Clank finally, because I've talked about it for a long time. And yeah, I'm not sure what after that. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I'll probably do another stream soon-ish, I'm thinking. You know, just for the heck of it, why not? Just hang out, talk about stuff. And yeah, I think that's about it. I'll see you next time, guys.